The Wyoming air carried the bite of snowmelt as Ethan Reed tracked the grizzly through Thunder Canyon. 9 years since Gettysburg, 9 years since he'd chosen solitude over civilization. He was a man who had built his cabin not for comfort, but for silence. A few logs stacked by his own hands, far from the memories of war. The massive bear had killed two of Samuel Henderson's cattle last week. The wealthy rancher paid well for Ethan's occasional tracking services. No questions asked. Now the bear was leaving prints big as dinner plates along the muddy riverbank. Ethan froze. 50 yards ahead, the grizzly rose on its hind legs, towering like Judgment Day. 700 pounds of fury sniffing the changing wind. The Winchester Model 1866 felt like an extension of his arm as he raised it. One breath in, half out. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot echoed between canyon walls. The bear dropped with a roar that shook loose stones from the cliff face. A clean kill, through the neck where the spine meets the skull. The way his father had taught him before the war took everything. Ethan was field dressing the bear when distant gunfire cut through the valley. Then a woman's scream, desperate and primal, carried over the roar of the swollen river. His knife stilled. In all his years of mountain solitude, he'd never heard such a sound in these heights. The rifle was back in his hands before conscious thought. He moved downriver at a hunter's pace, each footfall deliberate despite his haste. The Thunder River was a churning brown monster that spring, fat with snowmelt and hungry for the unwary. He crouched behind a lightning-struck pine at the river bend. Below, a woman clung to a fallen cottonwood jutting into the rapids. But it wasn't the river that had drawn her scream. Two riders on the far bank were firing at her, bullets spitting water inches from her head. Blackwell's men. Ethan recognized the blood-red bandanas, murdering bastards who'd been terrorizing the territory for months. The Winchester's action slid smooth as silk as he chambered around. He steadied against the pine, drew breath, and squeezed. The first rider jerked backward, tumbling from his saddle. The second wheeled his horse and vanished into the tree line. Ethan didn't waste time watching him flee. The woman's grip was failing, her dark hair plastered against pale skin as river water surged around her shoulders. He dropped the rifle, kicked off his boots, and plunged into the freezing current. The cold hit like a sledgehammer. The river clawed at him, desperate to drag another soul to its muddy depths. 50 feet of churning water separated him from the woman, and every inch fought him. A floating log slammed into his ribs. Pain flared, but he kept moving. When he reached her, her eyes were already closing, her fingers loosening from the branch. "Hold on!" he shouted above the river's roar, his arm circling her waist. Her body was limp against him as he fought the current back to shore. They collapsed on the muddy bank. For long moments, all he could do was breathe, ragged, heavy gasps that matched the roar of the river. Then she coughed. Water spilled from blue-tinged lips. Her eyes fluttered open, green as summer sage but filled with terror. That's when he saw the blood. A bullet had grazed her shoulder, leaving a 3-inch furrow in pale flesh. Not fatal, but in these mountains, any wound could kill if infection set in. "You're safe," he said, voice rough from disuse. Few people had heard him speak in years. "But you're hurt. My cabin's close." He carried her through forest shadows, her weight slight against his chest. The woman drifted between consciousness and darkness, murmuring words he couldn't catch. The bullet graze wasn't her only injury. Purple bruises marked her wrists like cruel bracelets, some fresh, some yellowing with age. A woman who'd known men's cruelty before today's violence. His cabin stood in a small clearing, backed against granite cliffs. A fortress of rough-hewn logs with narrow windows a man could shoot from if needed. Inside, he laid her on his cot and worked methodically. The field hospital at Antietam had taught him more about bullet wounds than any man should know. She woke as he cleaned the graze with whiskey. Her hands shot out, fingers circling his wrist with surprising strength. "Where am I?" Fear made her voice sharp. Her eyes darted to the door, the windows searching for escape. "My land, near Thunder River." He kept his movements slow, unthreatening. "Those men at the river, they weren't shooting to scare you." "I can't go to town." The words tumbled out in desperate haste. "Please, they'll find me there." Ethan nodded once. "No town, just rest." He turned to stoke the fire, giving her privacy as she pulled his spare shirt around her shoulders. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crack of burning pine. "My name's Ethan Reed," he said finally, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so long unspoken. "Sarah Morgan," she answered, clutching the blanket tighter. Her knuckles were white with tension. Later, as she slept fitfully under the influence of willow bark tea, Ethan checked her belongings, a necessary precaution. The small satchel she'd somehow kept with her through the river held little. A silver locket with a child's portrait, a change of clothes, and a folded scrap of paper. Ethan spread the paper on his table, a crude map with landmarks he recognized. Thunder Ridge, the old silver mine, Sweetwater Creek. In the center, marked with an X, were the words Red Snake Mine in a man's bold hand. He was still studying it when she woke and caught him. The fear in her eyes hardened to something colder. "Is this why they're hunting you?" he asked, tapping the map. Her silence was answer enough. That night, as darkness wrapped around the cabin, she approached where he sat by the fire, her borrowed shirt sliding off one pale shoulder. "Will you stay if I undress?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes were dead. The look of someone who'd learned that bodies were currency. Ethan looked away. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Morgan. No one's going to touch you here." A small, broken sound escaped her lips. Half sob, half bitter laugh. First time a man said that and meant it. She returned to the cot, her back to him, shoulders shaking silently. Ethan stayed by the fire until dawn, the Winchester across his knees, watching the darkness beyond his window. Blackwell's men weren't known for giving up easily. Morning revealed what night had hidden. Boot prints circled the cabin. At least 3 men had watched them while they slept. Ethan tracked the signs methodically, finding cigarette butts, a whittled stick, an empty whiskey flask. The riders had withdrawn before dawn, heading west toward Sweetwater. Reporting back. "They found us." He dropped the flask on the table before Sarah. "Time for truth, Mrs. Morgan. Those weren't ordinary bandits. Blackwell's men don't hunt women through mountains for sport." Sarah's fingers trembled around her coffee cup. "James, my husband, owned the Red Snake Mine. It was failing until 3 months ago when he found a new vein. Rich beyond anything he'd seen." She touched the map. "This shows where. He kept it secret, told only me. And now he's dead." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Bar fight, they said. Cards turned bad." She shook her head. "James never gambled, never drank. But his brother Victor, he did both. Victor is older, colder. He always resented James inheriting their father's mining business." Victor Morgan. Ethan knew the name. Former Confederate officer. Businessman with political ambitions. Man with blood on his hands few could see. "He's powerful in Sweetwater," Sarah continued. "Marshal, bank, judge. They all answer to his money. When I questioned James's death, he came to our home." Her hand unconsciously touched her bruised wrists. "Said I could leave with nothing or stay and be his wife instead. So you took the map and ran. It was James's legacy, his dream." Her voice hardened. "I won't let Victor steal it with his brother's blood still fresh on his hands." Their conversation was interrupted by hoofbeats. Ethan's rifle was in his hands before the rider came into view. Jake Wilson, foreman at the Henderson Ranch, where Ethan occasionally worked tracking predators and hunting game. "Reed, thought you'd want to know." Jake's eyes widened at the sight of Sarah. "Well now, you've got trouble brewing, friend." Speak your piece, Wilson. Jake dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. Victor Morgan's offering $500 for anyone who brings in his runaway sister-in-law. Claims she's unstable with grief. Stole family heirlooms. He spat into the dirt. 500 would make a lot of men forget their conscience. How many has he hired? Blackwell's whole crew. 8 men, mean as snakes. Jake glanced at Sarah. Ma'am, whatever you've got might be worth considering if it's worth your life. Sarah's chin lifted. My husband's life was worth more. After Jake left, Ethan methodically prepared extra ammunition, jerky and hardtack, canteen. The mountains held 100 hiding places if you knew where to look. We leave at dusk, he told Sarah. Less chance of being spotted. She watched him check the Winchester's action. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. Ethan's hands stilled. I know enough about men like Victor Morgan. They never made it to dusk. The attack came as afternoon shadows lengthened. 5 riders emerging from the tree line, spreading out in practice formation. Max Blackwell himself led them, recognizable by his silver-mounted revolvers, and the scar splitting his face from temple to jaw. Reed! Blackwell's voice carried across the clearing. Send out the woman and walk away. This ain't your fight. Ethan positioned Sarah behind the stone chimney. Stay low. If I fall, run for the north ridge. Cave behind the waterfall. The first shot shattered the window beside him. Ethan answered with the Winchester, catching a rider in the shoulder. The man tumbled from his horse, cursing. What followed was a symphony of violence. Bullets splintered wood and thudded into logs. Gunsmoke filled the air, acrid and thick. Ethan worked the rifle with mechanical precision. Aim, fire, chamber the next round. 1 man down, another. But they had numbers in position. A bullet grazed Ethan's arm. Another embedded in the door frame inches from his head. They were being driven back, deeper into the cabin. The back window, he hissed to Sarah. When I start firing, go. Her hand gripped his sleeve. Not without you. I'll be right behind. He meant it as truth, not comfort. Ethan emptied the Winchester in rapid succession, forcing the attackers to cover. Sarah slipped through the narrow rear window. He followed seconds later as bullets tore through the cabin wall. They ran blind through forest shadows, the sound of pursuit close behind. Horses couldn't navigate the steep terrain, giving them temporary advantage. Ethan led them up forgotten game trails, through streamlets that would hide their scent, over rock faces that left no tracks. By nightfall, they'd reached his emergency cache, a shallow cave hidden behind a stand of aspens. Inside were supplies he'd hoped never to need. Ammunition, pemmican, medical supplies. The preparations of a man who never fully believed the war was behind him. Sarah collapsed against the cave wall, exhaustion etched in every line of her body. I've brought this down on you. My choice. Ethan checked her bullet graze, relief washing through him at finding it clean. As he redressed her wound, she studied his face in the fading light. You've done this before. The war? Union cavalry, Antietam, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor. Names that still haunted his dreams. My husband's brother fought for the Confederacy, came back changed. Her voice turned bitter. Says the war taught him to take what he wants. War teaches different lessons to different men. That night, as a mountain cold settled into their bones, Sarah told him about her son. 2 years old when typhoid took him, how she'd had nothing left except James and his dreams for their mine. In turn, Ethan spoke of his brother falling at Gettysburg, the fiancé who couldn't wait for a man who might never come home, the emptiness that drove him west. By morning, they were no longer strangers. Something deeper had formed, not romance, but the bond of survivors recognizing their own kind. Ethan spent the day teaching Sarah what she might need to survive. how to load and fire the spare Colt revolver, how to read tracks and weather signs, which plants could heal and which would kill. "We can't hide forever," she said as evening approached. "Victor won't stop." "No," Ethan agreed, "which is why we're going to Sweetwater. That's suicide. It's where your answers are. And my old cavalry captain now serves as circuit judge." His eyes met hers. "Judge Cartwright believes in evidence, not money." Sweetwater sprawled along Thunder River's gentler southern reaches, a town built on silver, cattle, and the transcontinental railroad's promise. By day, it belonged to commerce and civilization. By night, to whiskey and violence. They entered under darkness, avoiding main streets. Martha Wheeler, who had nursed Ethan through pneumonia 2 winters past, took them in without question. Her cottage behind the church offered temporary sanctuary. "Victor Morgan's men are everywhere," Martha warned, setting food before them. "Watching the roads, the hotel, the stage office. He's telling everyone his poor sister-in-law has lost her mind with grief." "We need to reach Judge Cartwright," Ethan said. Martha's weathered face creased with worry. "The judge is conducting circuit court in Riverton. Won't be back for 3 days. 3 days they didn't have." Sarah's shoulders slumped in defeat, but Ethan's mind was already reformulating plans. "The bank," he said suddenly. "Would James Morgan have kept papers there? Proof of the mine's ownership?" Hope flickered across Sarah's face. "The deed is in our safe deposit box, but I can't access it without appearing in public." Ethan nodded. "But I can get a message to someone who can help us." That someone was Thomas Henley, bank clerk and fellow Union veteran. The man had lost a leg at Chancellorsville, but none of his courage. Henley's message reached them before dawn. Morgan's brother altered records. Claims joint ownership. But original deed exists in James Morgan's box. Need legal holder to access. Found something else, too. A journal page torn from James Morgan's diary. Hidden in his personal effects. "That's you," Ethan told Sarah. "We need that deed and whatever's in that journal. Victor watches the bank like a hawk. Then we create a distraction." The plan formed with military precision. Martha would spread word that Sarah Morgan had been spotted heading north on the morning stage. Meanwhile, Ethan contacted 3 men he trusted, former soldiers now working Henderson's ranch. Men who owed him favors and held no love for Victor Morgan's methods. But even the best plans rarely survive first contact. They were a block from the bank when disaster struck. Max Blackwell himself rounded the corner, stopping cold at the sight of them. Recognition flashed across his scarred face. "Morgan!" he bellowed, hand dropping to his gun. Ethan shoved Sarah toward the alley. "Run!" His Colt cleared leather as Blackwell's first shot went wide. People scattered, screaming. Ethan fired twice, driving Blackwell behind a water trough. Return fire splintered the boardwalk at his feet. Sarah hadn't run. Instead, she ducked behind a freight wagon, the small Colt steady in her hands. Her first shot went high, but it kept another of Blackwell's men pinned down. "The bank!" Ethan shouted. "Go!" This time she moved, darting between buildings as Ethan laid covering fire. More of Blackwell's men appeared, converging from side streets, the air filled with gun smoke and the crack of revolvers. Ethan fought his way toward the bank, one shot at a time. A bullet burned across his thigh. Another singed his ear. The world narrowed to simple mathematics. 6 shots, then reload. Cover, move, fire. He caught glimpses of Sarah reaching the bank, disappearing inside. Good. Now he just needed to stay alive long enough for her to get what they needed. The tide turned with the thunder of approaching hooves. Henderson's men right on schedule. They rode in hard, rifles blazing, scattering Blackwell's outgunned crew. Ethan limped to the bank entrance, blood soaking his pant leg. Inside, Sarah stood with Thomas Henley, clutching papers in trembling hands. "I have it," she said. "The deed and—" She thrust another document forward. A page from James's journal. It says Victor helped sabotage James's earlier mine, causing the cave-in that killed 3 men. Victor wanted control all along. He's been planning this for years. "Time to go," Ethan urged. The gunfire outside had stopped, but that meant nothing. They emerged to find Sweetwater's main street transformed into an armed standoff. Henderson's men on one side, Blackwell's crew on the other. And walking between them, flanked by the town marshal, came Victor Morgan himself. Victor was everything his reputation suggested. Tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes at odds with his politician's smile. The silver-headed cane in his right hand was rumored to conceal a sword blade. "Sarah, my dear sister." His voice carried the soft accent of Virginia aristocracy. "This charade has gone far enough. Your grief has clouded your judgment." Sarah stepped forward, papers clutched to her chest. "These say differently, Victor. James's real will, the original deed, and a page from his journal detailing how you sabotaged his first mine." Victor's smile didn't waver. "Forged, obviously. Marshal, arrest this man." He gestured toward Ethan. "For kidnapping and the murder of my men." The marshal moved forward, hand on his gun. Ethan tensed, calculating odds that grew longer by the second. "That won't be necessary, Marshal." The new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Judge Cartwright stood at the edge of the crowd. Unlike Victor's finery, the judge wore the practical clothes of a man who'd ridden hard to reach town. His weathered face showed nothing as he surveyed the standoff. "Your Honor," Victor began smoothly, "this woman has evidence I should see," Cartwright finished, "in my office. Now, everyone else, stand down." Victor's mask slipped, just a flicker of rage quickly controlled. "Of course, Your Honor." Inside the judge's office, truth unfolded like a map. The original deed. James Morgan's real will. Most damning, the journal page describing Victor's sabotage of the earlier mine, written in James's own hand. "Seems clear enough," Judge Cartwright said finally. "Mrs. Morgan is the legal owner of the Red Snake Mine and all associated claims, and these allegations of sabotage warrant further investigation." Victor's mask shattered completely. "You can't possibly accept these forgeries. She bewitched my brother, and now—" "Enough!" The judge slammed his hand down. "The evidence speaks for itself, and I've received telegrams about your business practices in Denver and Cheyenne. Former partners eager to testify." Victor's hand drifted toward his cane. Ethan tensed, ready. "Try it," he said softly. "Give me the excuse." For a moment, murder gleamed in Victor's eyes. Then calculation replaced rage. His hand dropped. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Sarah replied, still in her voice. "It is." Victor left Sweetwater that night, ahead of further charges. Max Blackwell wasn't so fortunate. The bounty on him from Colorado territory ensured he'd hang before month's end. Sarah's vindication spread through town like wildfire. By morning, former friends who'd believed Victor's lies came offering apologies she accepted with quiet dignity. The Red Snake Mine proved as rich as James had believed. Sarah hired Henderson's men to work it, ensuring fair pay and safer conditions than most operations. But she herself preferred the small horse ranch she established outside town, a place to build something new from tragedy's ashes. Ethan declined her offer to partner in the mine. Gold had never interested him. But when Sweetwater's citizens approached him about becoming their new marshal, he found himself considering routes for the first time in 9 years. One evening, as summer painted the mountains gold, he sat on the porch of his new house at the edge of town. The Winchester rested across his knees, habit rather than necessity now. Sarah rode up the path, her mare's hooves kicking up dust in the evening light. She'd taken to wearing riding clothes instead of dresses, her hair braided simply down her back. The mountain air had brought color to her cheeks and a straightness to her spine that spoke of healing. She dismounted, studying the badge on his chest with a smile. Marshall Reed, the town made a wise choice. Remains to be seen. He set the rifle aside. The mine treating you well? Well enough, though I prefer the horses. She hesitated, then asked the question that had hung between them since Victor's departure. Will you stay now? In Sweetwater? Ethan gazed past her to the town and mountains beyond. For years, he'd avoided putting down roots, convinced that anything permanent would be taken from him again. But the badge on his chest already answered her question. This town needs a marshal who knows trouble when he sees it, he said finally. I'm not going anywhere. Their relationship had grown into something neither had expected to find again, not just survival, but trust, the kind of foundation that might, with time and care, become something more. They had both lost too much to rush into sentiment, but standing side by side, they had found their way back to living, not just surviving. As night fell across Sweetwater, a rider appeared on the northern trail, dust-covered and urgent. He dismounted at the marshal's office, bearing news from Montana Territory. The last of Blackwell's men had joined forces with the notorious Williams gang, and they were heading south. For Ethan Reed, the war had never really ended. It had just found new battlefields.